A deafening roar filled my ears the moment my daughter's piercing scream cut through the air, a wave of icy dread locking every muscle in my body. I tore around the corner of our peaceful suburban street, nearly tripping over the curb, and there she was, Sophia, crumpled on the pavement, tears streaming down her face, her right arm twisted at a gut-wrenching angle. Looming over her, her face twisted into a cruel sneer, stood Margaret Walters, known to us all as Karen, the iron-fisted HOA president. Before I could even catch my breath, Karen thrust her arm out, jabbing a finger at my trembling girl. "Get up, you weird little girl," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. My heart thundered in my chest, and something inside me shattered at that word. Weird. Sophia, my 14-year-old, is on the autism spectrum, gentle, imaginative, and endlessly curious, though she sometimes stumbles with sudden shifts or social cues. None of that justified the sight of her lying there, arms quivering, with Karen glaring down as if she were some blemish on the neighborhood's pristine image. I dropped to my knees, shoving Karen's presence aside for a second, my focus locked on Sophia's ashen face. Her breaths came in shaky hiccups as she cradled her arm against her chest, the unnatural bend making my stomach lurch. "Dad," she whimpered, tears spilling over, "it hurts." I rested a gentle hand on her shoulder, fighting the rising tide of panic. Which city of the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you have any confrontation with the HOA. We will narrate your story on our channel. "I'm here," I managed, though my voice shook. "Hold still, let's see." Karen scoffed behind me, crossing her arms. "That's what she gets for running around my yard," she said, chin lifting in defiance. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Sophia never ran into people's yards intentionally. In fact, she rarely even steps off the sidewalk without checking multiple times. But the bigger question was why Karen thought any yard boundary gave her the right to lay a hand on my daughter at all. The sight of that twisted arm, the memory of that horrid snapping sound I'd heard just moments before. My blood felt like molten lava surging in my veins, yet I knew I had to stay calm. Years of specialized training hammered that into me, because if I lost my temper now, it wouldn't help Sophia. Truth was, no one here realized my actual occupation. To these neighbors, I'm simply James, the quiet man who commutes long hours. They never suspected I worked with the FBI or that I'd spent the better part of 15 years handling tense negotiations, covert missions, and high-stakes operations. And here, in the middle of a supposedly peaceful suburb, an entitled HA Karen had just broken my autistic daughter's arm. I took a shuddering breath, the taste of rage bitter on my tongue. "Sophia, I'll call an ambulance," I whispered, trying to keep my tone steady for her sake. She nodded, eyelids fluttering in pain. My phone felt slippery in my grasp as I dialed 911, hands shaking. The dispatcher's voice crackled in my ear. I forced myself to speak clearly. "My daughter's injured, possible broken arm. Need medical assistance? Please address Sycamore Lane near Maplewood Drive in the Magnolia Woods. HOA." The dispatcher assured help was on the way. Aaron rolled her eyes, stepping forward. "Don't make this dramatic," she snapped, glaring at Sophia, as though my daughter had committed some affront. She ran onto my grass. I told her to stay off. She tried to push past me, so I held her back. She shrugged, as though forcibly grabbing a child's arm and twisting it until it snapped was mere discipline. I bristled, wanting to demand a better explanation, but I had to keep Sophia as the priority. A neighbor, a middle-aged man named Randall, came rushing over, alarm etched on his face. I heard screaming, "What happened?" He knelt next to Sophia, and me, eyes wide at the sight of her distorted limb. "Oh God, is she all right? What the hell did you do, Karen? Karen drew herself up, face colouring with anger. She trespassed. This is private HOA property. Randall looked aghast, glancing at me as if to confirm. I felt my throat constrict. She's 14, I said quietly, pressing a gentle hand to Sophia's shoulder to keep her still. Even if she got too close to your yard, you had no right to put your hands on her. Karen huffed, tossing her hair. I was teaching her a lesson. These kids think they can do whatever they want, especially if they're weird. That word again. I heard it echo, blending with the memory of Sophia's pained gasp. I had to close my eyes for a moment, counting backward from 5 to calm the urge to lunge at Karen. My fatherly instincts roared for justice. In the distance, the wail of approaching sirens cut through the hush that had settled over the street. A few other neighbors peeked from windows or stood on porches. Evidently drawn by the commotion, but hesitant to approach, Randall carefully took off his jacket, draping it over Sophia for warmth. Her lips trembled, beads of sweat. "Dad," she whispered. It hurt so bad. I stroked her hair, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I know, sweetheart. The ambulance is coming." Karen kept pacing, muttering under her breath about disrespectful brats and property lines. Randall fixed her with a disbelieving stare. "Karen, you can't just break a kid's arm because they stepped on your lawn." She shot him a deadly glare. "It's my right to protect my property value from these people." My pulse pounded, each beat reminding me of how close I was to letting my controls slip. But I pressed my hand to Sophia's uninjured shoulder, focusing on her shallow breathing. When the ambulance finally arrived, 2 paramedics jumped out, kneeling at Sophia's side with professional efficiency. One asked me quick questions about her condition. I explained she was on the autism spectrum and might not handle sudden movements or bright lights well. They nodded sympathetically, careful as they inspected her arm. Sophia flinched, tears slipping down her cheeks as they felt. For a frack, definitely broken. One paramedic murmured, jaw tense, "We need to get her on a stretcher." Karen hovered, arms folded. "I did nothing wrong," she repeated, though no one was listening to her. My attention was fixed entirely on Sophia, who let out a small cry of agony when they lifted her. My heart clenched, a wave of guilt crashing over me for not being there sooner. The paramedics gently placed her on a stretcher, supporting her arm as best they could. She squeezed my hand, eyes brimming with pain. "Sir, are you riding with us?" one paramedic asked, stepping aside so I could help. I nodded vigorously, my chest too tight to speak. Randall hovered as if wanting to help further, but I shook my head, murmuring, "Thanks." Then, as they wheeled Sophia toward the ambulance, I looked over my shoulder at Karen. She stood with her chin raised as though she'd done the right thing, as though snapping a child's arm was justified by some petty property rule. The tension inside me mounted, a coil of fury I had to stifle until Sophia was safe. We sped to the hospital in the back of that ambulance. I held Sophia's hand, whispering reassurances while the paramedics administered mild pain relief, my face streaked with tears twisted with every bump in the road. My mind replayed Karen's sneer, her venomous words. A part of me, the part that deals with crises daily, reminded me not to lash out. I needed to gather facts, maintain control, then I would bring the full weight of accountability down on that woman, because once my daughter was stable, I'd reveal a side of me Karen never dreamed existed in this sleepy HOA. At the hospital, doctors confirmed a clean fracture near Sophia's elbow. They explained she'd need a cast and possibly further imaging to rule out complications. She clung to me while they did the initial X-rays, Trembling from both pain and distress, I ran my free hand gently across her hair, murmuring words of comfort. "You're going to be okay," I repeated softly, though every second stoked my anger. She looked at me with trust in her eyes, and I silently swore to protect her from any further harm. After the X-rays, they prepped her arm for a cast. The entire process left her exhausted, drifting in and out of a painkiller-induced haze. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed with calls and texts from neighbors wanting updates. I skimmed them, noticing multiple mentions that the police were on site back in the neighborhood speaking with Karen. My lips curled into a grim line. Good. She needed to face immediate consequences. But then I saw a text from a friend living a few houses down. "Karen is telling cops your daughter was destroying her garden," it read. Another message said she claims it was self-defense. My chest tightened. Self-defense against a child half her size, clearly unarmed, and with a condition that makes her shy away from conflict. Unbelievable. Yet I'd encountered liars before. This was practically routine in my line of work. The difference this time was that the victim was my daughter. A nurse stepped in, letting me know I could see Sophia again. She lay in a hospital bed, arm in a cast, face pale, but calmer now that the pain was controlled. My wife, who'd rushed over from her job the moment I called, was by her side, tears streaking her cheeks. I gave them both a quick hug, explaining I'd handle everything. My wife's eyes blazed. "She broke our daughter's arm," she whispered, voiced tight with anger and disbelief. I nodded, pressing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I know," I replied quietly, "and I'm not letting her get away with it." We decided my wife would stay with Sophia while I went to speak to the police. On the drive back, I let out a slow breath, trying to quell the rage rowing inside. In my capacity as an FBI agent, I'd faced down criminals far worse than Karen, but none of them had inflicted physical harm on my child. That changed everything. Yet, I had to remain professional, collecting details so that any charges pressed against Karen would stick. She needed to learn that her little kingdom of HOA rules did not place her above the law. When I reached our street, I saw a police cruiser parked near Karen's pristine lawn. She stood there, arms waving, talking animatedly at an officer who jotted down notes. Another neighbor watched from a distance, arms folded, clearly upset. I parked, took a moment to center myself, then approached. The officer turned, noticing me, and Karen immediately pointed. "That's the father," she spat. "He's the one letting his weird daughter run wild around here." My jaw tightened. The officer gave me a polite nod. "Sir, can you confirm your daughter was injured? We need your statement." Karen interjected. "He won't tell the truth. That girl, she refused to listen, tried to push her way onto my property." I had to defend myself. Defend herself from what exactly? A child on the spectrum. The sheer absurdity made my head spin. But I inhaled slowly, controlling my reaction. "Yes, my daughter's in the hospital with a confirmed broken arm," I said, voice steady. "She's autistic." And from what I saw, Karen grabbed her arm and twisted it. There was no self-defense. My daughter wasn't harming anything. The officer nodded, eyes flicking between Karen and me. He asked if there were any witnesses. Randall was out of sight, but I mentioned he'd seen some of it. The officer scribbled notes. "We'll need to interview him," he said, "and any other neighbors who might have seen or heard something." Karen let out a hiss of annoyance, pointing her manicured finger at me. "Your daughter better stay off my property. If I see her again, I'll—" The officer cut her off, raising a hand. "Mom, that's enough. Threatening a minor is a serious matter, especially after she's already injured." Karen's face blanched, but she didn't back down. "Threatening? I'm just warning them," she snapped, as though that made it any better. The officer turned to me again. "Would you like to press charges?" I stared at Karen, the fury in my veins threatening to overflow, but I kept my voice calm. "Absolutely," I said, each syllable clipped. "That woman committed assault on my child." He nodded, flipping through his notebook. "Understood." "Well, take your formal statement at the station." Karen let out a bark of disbelief. "Arrest me!" she demanded, voice climbing. "I'm the HOA president. I have every right to remove trespassers. That brat was messing around near my hydrangeas." The officer gave her a warning look. "Breaking a child's arm is not removal. It's assault. We have enough here to proceed. You should cooperate." She tried to protest, but he signaled for her to turn around. Another officer approached to assist. Karen sputtered, eyes wild. "You can't do this. I'm protecting the neighborhood." A wave of satisfaction coursed through me, though I forced myself not to show it. The officer began reading Karen her rights, confirming that she was being arrested for suspicion of felony assault pending further investigation. She shrieked about calling a lawyer, about filing complaints. The knot of tension in my chest loosened slightly. Seeing her realized that her supposed authority meant nothing, but I also knew this was just the beginning. Karen would likely claim innocence, spin stories, and do everything in her power to shift blame. I accompanied the officer to the station, giving my statement in detail. I explained that Sophia was on the spectrum, rarely approached anyone's yard without permission, and that I'd found her on the sidewalk, not deep in Karen's property. I described how Karen had admitted to teaching her a lesson, basically confessing to a physical confrontation. The officer listened intently, then typed up the official report. He asked if I had a background that might be relevant to understanding legal procedures. I hesitated briefly, then decided to reveal it. "I am an FBI agent," I said, quietly. "But I'm speaking here as a father. I want to ensure justice is served for my daughter." His eyebrows rose in surprise, but he nodded. "All right. We'll do everything by the book," he assured me. "Given the severity, she's likely looking at serious charges if your daughter's medical records confirm a break." Satisfied, I returned to the hospital. On the way, I called a colleague from the FBI, a friend who specialized in child crime cases, just to get an outside perspective. He was appalled by the story, offering suggestions on how to compile evidence and witness testimonies. Our conversation fueled my resolve. By the time I reached Sophia's room, I felt more prepared. She lay propped on pillows, an IV dripping fluids into her arm, while my wife sat reading to her from a book of fairy tales. The moment Sophia saw me, she held out her uninjured hand. "Hey, sweetheart," I murmured, gently, squeezing her fingers. She offered a faint smile. "How are you feeling?" I asked. She shrugged, wincing slightly. "Tired?" she said. "My arm hurts, but it's better than before." My wife exhaled in relief that I was back, quietly, asking for an update on the situation. I explained that Karen had been arrested, but we'd likely have a legal battle ahead. Sophia listened, brow furrowing. She's a bright kid, and though she doesn't always show it in typical ways, she understands more than people realize. "Did she say why?" Sophia asked softly. "Why she hurt me?" A swirl of pain tightened my chest. "She said you were on her lawn," I replied, carefully, "and called you names, but that's not okay. No one has the right to hurt you." Sophia's eyes flickered with confusion, then sadness. "I was just walking," she whispered. "I like to count the flowers in people's yards. Sometimes I step closer to see them better." The corners of her mouth trembled. I guess she didn't like that. I blinked back a rush of anger. My wife's eyes shimmered with tears as she stroked Sophia's hair. "Aaron doesn't have the right to do that," I reiterated softly. I promise you she won't get away with it. Sophia nodded, hugging her stuffed cat with her good arm. My wife shot me a determined look, silently vowing that we'd see this through. The next day, the doctor approved Sophia for discharge, cautioning that she'd need follow-up visits to monitor the healing. We loaded her gently into the car, placing pillows around her to keep her arm from jostling. She looked out the window, uncharacteristically quiet, occasionally rubbing her cast. I ought to do more for her, but the best I could do was ensure the legal system held Karen accountable. My phone buzzed with a message from Randall saying the police had interviewed him. He confirmed that he witnessed Karen forcefully grabbing Sophia's arm, twisting it while Sophia cried. That corroborated my daughter's account. As we pulled into our driveway, tension coiled in my stomach. The memory of Karen's mocking sneer lingered. Sophia peered out, eyes drawn to the patch of sidewalk where it happened. I quickly suggested we use the garage entrance, hoping to spare her the painful reminder. She agreed, letting us help her inside. News travelled fast among the neighbours. Some approached our door with sympathy, offering to bring meals or help with errands while Sophia recovered. Others looked uneasy, probably worried about the fallout within the HOA. It seemed Karen had ruled the association with an iron fist, fining people for trivial infractions. Now that she was in legal trouble, folks weren't sure what to expect next. The board members left cryptic notes about an emergency meeting. My wife shook her head, more concerned about Sophia than any HOA drum. For the next few days, we settled into a quiet routine of caring for Sophia. She needed assistance with everyday tasks, especially since her dominant arm was in a cast. We tried to keep things peaceful, encouraging her to color or read, distracting her from the trauma. Occasionally, she'd whisper questions like, "What if she comes back?" My heart clenched each time. "We won't let her near you, I promise, and we have legal measures to stop her." Meanwhile, the police continued gathering statements. They confirmed that Karen was out on bail pending a formal hearing. My anger flared at the idea of her prowling free around the neighborhood, but I reminded myself that we lived in a society governed by due process. She would have her day in court. I began, compiling every scrap of evidence I could. Photos of Sophia's cast, medical records, any eyewitness accounts, plus a statement from the hospital staff who treated her. My colleague at the FBI gave me discreet advice on how to organize everything, so prosecutors could build a strong case. One afternoon, I stepped outside to retrieve the mail, only to find a typed letter slipped under our front door. It bore the HOA letterhead, presumably from the board, announcing that Karen was suspended from her position as president. My lip curled in grim satisfaction. The letter also expressed regret for the unfortunate incident, urging residents to remain calm. The measured tone made me roll my eyes. Our child was hospitalized, and they called it unfortunate, as though Karen had spilled coffee. At least the step meant she no longer held official sway over the neighborhood. Yet a few days later, a scrawny man in a cheap suit showed up at our doorstep, introducing himself as Karen's lawyer. My wife glared at him from behind me as he cleared his throat. "I'd like to discuss a possible settlement," he began, tone oily. "My client regrets the incident and is willing to cover medical expenses if your daughter retracts any statements that might damage her reputation." A pulse of hot anger surged in me. So this was their tactic, trying to silence us with hush money. I stepped onto the porch, shutting the door behind me so Sophia wouldn't hear. "My daughter's arm was broken," I said, voice low. Karen called her weird and inflicted serious harm. "We're pressing charges. That's not negotiable." The lawyer attempted a slimy smile, offering a mild shrug. "These matters can be resolved more quickly without going to court." Think of the emotional toll on your child. My fists clenched. I recognized the subtle threat. They were hinting that a trial might be stressful for Sophia, especially given her autism. Indeed it would be, but letting Karen avoid accountability would be far worse.
"I think we're done here," I said curtly. "Any further communication can go through the district attorney." His composure slipped. He mumbled about legal costs and wasted time. I closed the door, breathing hard, adrenaline spiking. My wife placed.
A gentle hand on my shoulder, eyes reflecting my own anger. "They're not scaring us into dropping this," she whispered. "We owe it to Sophia to stand firm." I nodded, determined. The formal hearing approached swiftly. The district attorney's office contacted us saying they'd gathered enough evidence for an assault charge with possible enhancements given Sophia's disability. Karen would appear before a judge to enter her plea. If it went to trial, we'd need to testify. Sophia grew anxious at the thought of seeing Karen again, but we assured her we'd protect her. We also arranged for her therapist to help with coping strategies for the stress. On the day of the hearing, we dropped Sophia off with a close friend who understood her needs. My wife and I drove to the courthouse, feeling the weight of the moment. The building's austere halls and echoing footsteps reminded me of many high-stakes cases I'd witnessed as an FBI agent. But this time was different. This was personal. Inside, Karen sat with her lawyer, looking annoyed rather than remorseful. She wore a crisp blazer, hair styled as though she intended to present herself as an upstanding citizen. When the judge called the case, the DA laid out a concise overview. Karen Walters is charged with aggravated assault on a minor with evidence, showing she intentionally caused serious bodily harm. Karen's lawyer tried to plead not guilty, claiming the injury was an accident. My jaw tightened as I listened. They repeated the same nonsense about self-defense and trespassing. The judge's gaze flicked to us, seeing our tension. Then he set a preliminary schedule for a full trial, unless both parties reached a plea deal. Karen's lawyer requested bail continuation, which the judge granted, though with an explicit warning that any harassment of the victim would lead to immediate revocation. Karen cast a venomous glance our way, as though blaming us for her predicament. My wife stiffened, but I gently guided her out of the courtroom. The swirl of reporters in the corridor shouted questions. We shook our heads, not wanting to turn this into a media spectacle. In the car, I exhaled, tension draining from my shoulders. "One step at a time," my wife whispered, and I nodded. If it went to trial, I'd testify with everything I had. In the meantime, we'd help Sophia heal physically and emotionally. Over the following weeks, Sophia's cast became a familiar burden. She adapted surprisingly well, learning to do simple tasks one-handed, though frustration sometimes brought tears. We arranged playdates with supportive friends who didn't pry about her arm, just offered kindness. Occasionally, she'd wake at night anxious, asking if Karen was going to come after her. Each time I'd reassure her, my heart twisting at the fear in her eyes. Then, one chilly afternoon, I saw a commotion down the street while I was raking leaves. A police car sat outside Karen's house again. I frowned, approaching a neighbor who watched from a distance. She whispered that Karen had violated her bail conditions by shouting threats at another family, apparently incensed they were siding with us. The police were hauling her away once more while she shrieked about conspiracies. My lips curved in grim satisfaction, though I pied the neighbors who had to endure her wrath. When the trial date finally arrived, my stomach churned with nerves. Sophia felt uneasy about going, so we arranged for her to testify via a closed circuit setup, if needed, to minimize her distress. My wife and I stepped into the packed courtroom, seeing Karen at the defense table, her expression stony, the prosecution. began with a powerful opening statement describing how Karen intentionally twisted a disabled girl's arm, calling her weird, leading to a fracture. The defense tried to paint it as a misunderstanding, claiming Karen only tried to guide Sophia off her property and that the fracture was an accident. A parade of witnesses took the stand. Randall testified about hearing the snap and seeing Karen yank Sophia's arm. He recounted Karen's hostility, her repeated complaints about that autistic kid messing with her yard. The paramedics described the injury's severity consistent with forced twisting. The doctor who treated Sophia explained the precise nature of the fracture, dismissing the notion it was a gentle misstep. Eventually they called me. I walked to the stand, taking the oath, aware that my FBI background might surface. The prosecutor guided me through the events, from hearing Sophia's scream to finding her on the sidewalk with a broken arm. I spoke calmly, detailing how Karen admitted she wanted to teach her a lesson. When the defense cross-examined, they tried to suggest I was biased, that my law enforcement training might have predisposed me to assume wrongdoing. I stared the lawyer down, replying that I witnessed Karen's callous attitude and that the physical evidence spoke for itself. The cross-examination ended weakly, failing to dent the facts. Then came the crucial moment, Sophia's testimony. The judge allowed her to speak via video from a separate room accompanied by a therapist. She looked fragile, wearing headphones, but mustered the courage to describe how she stepped closer to admire some flowers, and Karen shouted, grabbed her, and called her weird. Her voice shook as she recounted the pain when Karen twisted her
arm. Tears welled in my eyes, listening to her halting words. The defense lawyer tried to fluster her, but the judge intervened, reminding them of her condition. Still, Sophia held steady, repeating what happened. I felt a surge of pride at her
bravery. When Karen took the stand, she portrayed herself as a victim of an unruly neighborhood child, claiming she only put a hand on Sophia's shoulder to guide her away. The prosecutor pounced, citing numerous neighbors' testimonies about Karen's hostility toward families, especially those who didn't fit her notion of normal. They played a recording where she ranted about odd kids. Karen's confidence wavered. Her words sounded hollow next to the stark evidence. Closing arguments arrived. The prosecution framed Karen as an individual who let her intolerance morph into physical violence, harming a vulnerable minor. The defense flailed, insisting there was no malicious intent, just a tragic accident. Observing the jury's faces, I sensed their skepticism toward Karen's story. They'd heard too many consistent accounts pointing to her deliberate actions. The jury deliberated for only a few hours. Sitting outside, my wife and I held hands. Tension coiled in every breath. Sophia stayed at home with a trusted neighbor, shielded from the final wave of legal proceedings. At last, the bailiff announced the jury had reached a verdict. We rose, hearts pounding. The foreman declared Karen guilty of felony assault on a
minor. A hush swept the courtroom, followed by a murmured gasp. Aaron's face twisted, and she let out a strangled protest.
The judge policed the room with a stern glare, continuing. There would be sentencing soon, but for now, bail was revoked. Relief flooded me, leaving me lightheaded. My wife gripped my arm, tears sliding down her cheeks. Karen screamed accusations, claiming we conspired against her. The judge banged the gavel, ordering her to be taken into custody. We watched as officers led her away, her bravado crumbling. I felt no sympathy, only the fierce satisfaction that our daughter's suffering was
acknowledged and that justice would be served.
When we returned home, we found Sophia in the living room, nervously coloring in a sketchbook. She paused, glancing up with wide eyes. We smiled softly. She recognized the relief in our expressions. "It's over," I said gently, kneeling beside her. Karen was found guilty. "She can't hurt you again?" Sophia's tense shoulders eased, a small smile lifting her lips. "Good," she whispered. Then, after a moment, she added, "Can I see the flowers outside now?" My wife and I exchanged emotional glances, nodding. "Sure, sweetie, let's go." We rolled her outside, carefully supporting her still healing arm. The air smelled of fresh cut grass, and the sun cast warm rays across the yard. Sophia approached the patch of sidewalk she'd once dreaded, studying the flowers at a safe distance, counting them softly under her breath. As she did, that shadow of fear lifted from her gaze. A neighbor across the street waved encouragingly, no longer worried about a tyrant harassing us. Over the next few days, the HOA board officially removed Karen from all positions, issuing an apology to us and offering to revise the association's rules to better accommodate children with special needs. It was a hollow gesture in some ways, but at least it signaled change. People left small gifts for Sophia, handwritten cards, puzzles, even a stuffed animal or two. A sense of community replaced the tension that once hovered around Karen's presence. When the sentencing hearing took place weeks later, we chose not to bring Sophia. The judge, thoroughly disgusted by Karen's actions and her unrepentant demeanor, imposed a stringent prison term. She appealed tearfully for leniency, but the evidence was overwhelming. She would spend years behind bars, and we could finally move forward with our lives without her menacing shadow lurking. One evening, after finishing up an at-home physical therapy session for Sophia's arm, I caught her carefully unwrapping a small canvas and paint set. She'd never been much for painting, but I guess the whole ordeal sparked something new in her. She began dabbing bright colors across the canvas, images of flowers swirling in abstract patterns. My wife and I watched, content. Sophia's new expression of creativity felt like a victory, a reclaiming of the sidewalk blooms that once led to tragedy. A few nights later, as I tucked her into bed, she peered at me with solemn eyes. "Dad," she said softly, "you work with the FBI. Does that mean you
catch bad guys?"
My heart fluttered. She knew bits about my job, but never asked in such direct terms. "Yes," I replied, voice gentle. "I do. I help make sure people followed the law." She nodded, lips pursed thoughtfully. "Is that how you caught Karen?" I hesitated, then smiled. "Not exactly. I used the law, but mostly I fought for you because no one should hurt you. You're my daughter, and I love you." She blinked, expression brightening, then snuggled under the covers. "Okay," she whispered, satisfied with the answer. From that moment on, something shifted in her. She seemed a little braver, more certain that the world, despite its cruelties, could be navigated with the right support. Her therapy progressed, and soon enough her cast came off. The doctors praised her healing, attributing it partly to her resilience and partly to her supportive environment. She still had nightmares sometimes, but each day she ventured outside with fewer traces of fear. My wife and I walked beside her, marveling at her determination. When the time came for me to rotate to a new assignment within the FBI, I hesitated, uncertain if uprooting would help or hinder Sophia's progress. But my wife gently reminded me that we'd found a supportive network of neighbors, people who had stood by us when Karen tried to spin lies, who brought meals and comfort. Sophia had also made new friends, forging bonds built on empathy. So, we stayed, choosing stability over relocation. The HOA, under new leadership, even hosted a small barbecue to welcome families with children on the spectrum, aiming to create a more inclusive environment. The irony wasn't lost on me, yet I appreciated the genuine effort. On a sunlit morning, months after the final sentencing, Sophia and I strolled down the sidewalk, her arm fully recovered. She paused by the edge of a yard brimming with sunflowers, tilting her head to count them, lips moving quietly. This time, no one emerged to scold her. No one called her weird or threatened violence. My chest felt light, a deep wave of gratitude welling inside. We'd come a long way from that terrible day when my daughter's scream shattered my world. "Are you okay?" Sophia asked, noticing my silence. I blinked, realizing tears threatened at the corners of my eyes. "Yes," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Just happy you can enjoy looking at flowers without worry." She smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Me too," she replied. We continued walking, the faint warmth of the sun wrapping us in a comforting glow. Some lessons are learned at a terrible price, but we refused to let bitterness define us. Instead, we found strength in our bond, reaffirming that no barrier, neither an arrogant HOA rule nor the cruelty of one woman, could keep us from ensuring our daughter's safety and peace of mind. And if Karen ever wondered whether her hateful act achieved anything, she'd likely never grasp the truth. Her attempt to break Sophia's spirit only reinforced our family's resolve to stand up for her with all the love and tenacity an FBI agent father and a devoted mother could muster. In the final quiet of that morning stroll, Sophia reached out her hand and I took it. Each of us, savoring the calm that came from justice, served from a future no longer overshadowed by Karen's malice. The scars would remain. Sophia sometimes flexed her arm with a slight wheeze, but they were proof that we survived, that we fought back, and that she, in all her autistic brilliance, was stronger than anyone who dared call her weird. As we stepped onto our porch, I felt a swell of pride that no hateful act could ever take away. We'd built a safer home for her, one flower at a time, armed with the unshakable belief that every child, regardless of differences, deserved the freedom to explore and grow without fear.